there are three key ways to, there are three ways that you can handle an objection. You could comply, you could overcome, and you could redirect. To comply is basically to give in. It's to concede that, to basically say the prospect's right with whatever they're saying. So if they say I'm not interested, it's kind of like saying, okay, well, sorry to call you, I'll let you get back to it. Now this is the weakest of the three options, so definitely keep that in mind. But do keep in mind at some point you have to comply. Just yesterday I was on a call with a salesperson, and I maybe stay on cold calls without hanging up, without completely hanging up on the salesperson. I'll go along with it maybe a little longer than most people because of the business that I'm in. But I'm also a nice guy, and I know how difficult cold calling is. So we crossed a point where I should have hung up on this sales guy because I was giving him basically the I'm not interested objection, and it's not a fit, and it was legitimate. I knew I wasn't blowing the guy off. He was there was no way I was going to purchase what he was selling. Anyways, the point here is that he kept trying to overcome and he would not comply. And I even got to a point where I said, listen, I mean, at any point, how far do we have to go before you accept what I say? And it was like he was almost not listening to me. So the quick point there is, at some point you have to comply. Either you're beginning to waste your time, or you're beginning to damage rapport with someone. Like if you do not accept their objections and it goes on beyond a point, you're going to begin to annoy the person and begin to damage any rapport you may have. So there's really no point to just continuing to go on and not give in to the objection. So the rule of thumb that I like to use is you try to do 2 or 3 things before you comply. The next objection handling option is to overcome the objection. So this is to it's to basically change the prospect's mind. It's to diffuse, to resolve the objection. So if the prospect says that they're not interested, this is kind of trying to basically making them interested. Now, what I want to point out with overcoming an objection is that this is a fairly challenging thing to try to do. You're basically changing someone's mind. So that's a difficult thing really in any context, whether you're selling or you're in a discussion or an argument. So, and to change someone's mind, you need a certain amount of attention and time to work with so that you can build your case. So it can be the overcome approach is fairly time consuming to really try to do properly. The other thing is that when you try to overcome, you do give a little bit of life to the objection. So if a prospect challenges you on something and then you spend, let's say, 10 minutes talking about it, well, then that gives a little bit of energy and attention to the objection. So it can make it a little bit stronger if you're not successful at diffusing it and successful at overcoming the objection. You might end up giving more life to the objection because there's more energy being put into it. The third objection handling option is to redirect, and this is basically, think of it as like a deflection, a segue. We are going to acknowledge the objection, and then we're going to try to redirect the conversation into a different area. Most likely it might be a related area, but we're going to try to get away from directly talking about that and trying to challenge and overcome that objection. An example is someone says, I'm not interested, responding with something like, hey, I understand. Do you mind if I ask you real quick, what are you guys doing in this area? So then the prospect most likely will answer that question. And at that point, the conversation is no longer centrally focused on I'm not interested. The goal of the redirect tactic is to basically keep the conversation going, and so there's there's a few different areas that you can redirect to. We're going to give you some real examples on how to redirect and where to redirect. But you can redirect to some of your pre-qualifying questions. You can redirect to your value statement. You can redirect to some of the pain points that you help to fix, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. But what I definitely want to show you is, I just showed you the different options you have, and the key thing to be aware of, depending on where you are in your discussion with a prospect, may impact what way you try to handle their objection. So on the left side of the screen are some of the stages that you might take a prospect through, especially early in a sales cycle. So you have your initial the initial time that you're speaking with them. This could be on a cold call. It could be me talking to them at a networking event. It could be on an inbound call. This is typically a 2 to 5 minute conversation. The next stage is is when you're talking for real. This is a meeting or an appointment. Now, I do want to point out, sometimes these first two stages could happen at the same time. You might call someone and you end up talking to them on the phone for 15-20 minutes. Those two stages happen at the same time. Me personally, depending on what you sell, I like to break them up. Like once I kind of am able to close the prospect on talking in more detail, I like to put some time on their calendar on another day. So the goal of that very first stage is to get to the second stage, and the third stage is sort of giving a presentation, a demonstration, maybe providing a proposal. Depending on what you sell, sometimes stage 2 and 3 might be all in one. Typically you cold call and then you're giving some sort of presentation or demonstration after that. But the point here is, let's get back to dealing with objections. So those are the stages. Now, I mentioned the goal of stage 1 is to get to the meeting. And in order to determine if it makes sense for us to meet, I typically kind of want to pre-qualify the prospect. So that's not necessarily determining is the prospect is the deal for real in terms of they have money, they're the right person, they definitely need what I have. That's really fully qualifying them. I want to just pre-qualify. I mean, are they in the general area where it makes sense for us to talk? So, and bear in mind that first conversation is 2 to 5 minutes. So what I do not want to do in that first initial contact is I do not want to try to overcome the objection. A couple reasons why. I don't have the time. I don't have the time to overcome the objection. 2 to 5 minutes is not enough time for me to build my case as to why the prospect is wrong and why I am right. Also, part of trying to overcome the objection is it's also part of really fully qualifying the prospect, meaning if the prospect has an issue that's going to prevent them from buying your product, you do want to identify that, and you do want to deal with that head on. But I don't need to deal with that in the cold call, because that's not really part of pre-qualifying. Pre-qualifying is determining, are we in the general area of it making sense? And so we can be in the general area of it making sense without really investigating as one area where they might have a major conflict. So what I'm trying to say there is that there's no need to try to overcome in the first cold call, the first initial contact, but we do maybe want to bring overcoming the objection in once we get to the appointment, the meeting. Now the reason why is because, well, there's a couple reasons why we can add this to our arsenal. And one is because we have more time and attention. We have 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe more if we're kind of consolidating our presentation and meeting stages. But we have the time to really get to the objection, deal with it, and yes, deal with it head on to see, is this a valid objection and should we close the file? But that's the time to do it. So I don't know whether I'm going into too much detail there, but the key takeaway there is that don't try to overcome objections on cold calls. just redirect to keep the call going so you can close for the appointment. And it's when you're on the appointment that you can potentially really try to deal with objections head on.